They called it a masterpiece of elegance, a punishment so refined, so delicate, that only royal blood was worthy of enduring it. In the candlelit chambers of ancient China, beauty and cruelty were often one and the same. Behind carved jade screens and the scent of burning sandalwood, screams were not forbidden. They were orchestrated. Every gesture, every cry had to be graceful. Every death, poetic. The executioners wore silk gloves not to soil their hands, but to preserve the illusion of nobility. And when the sentence was delivered, it was never called torture. It was art. They called it the silk punishment, a method designed not to spill blood but to break the body through softness, a slow unraveling hidden beneath the shimmer of silk and the illusion of grace. The condemned were not peasants or thieves. They were queens, concubines, and women of the emperor's court. To the courtiers who watched, it looked like ritual. To the women who endured it, it was a descent into a silence so exquisite it almost seemed divine. No one wrote about it openly. The records were buried. The silk garments burned. And yet, fragments remain, accounts whispered by servants who vanished the next day. Drawings hidden in the folds of forbidden scrolls. They speak of a device, beautiful, precise and merciless, built for those whose crime was not betrayal, but imperfection. Tonight we open those lost pages again, and what you'll see may change how you understand beauty. Forever. Centuries ago, during the height of the imperial dynasties, China stood as the pinnacle of refinement, a civilization obsessed with harmony, grace, and control. The emperor was not just a ruler. He was the living embodiment of order. His word could shape heaven and earth. His court, a stage where beauty and obedience danced in fragile balance. In the forbidden city, everything had its place. The servants bowed with practiced precision. The concubines smiled without emotion. Even the air seemed rehearsed, perfumed, still watching. But beneath that perfection was a truth far less elegant. The emperor's court was a theater of fear, where a single misstep could cost a life. A misplaced glance, a rumor whispered, a beauty that shone too brightly, all could be seen as a threat to power. The royal women lived within gilded cages, draped in silk, adorned with jade, yet imprisoned by rules no one dared question. They were trained to move like shadows, to speak only when summoned, to exist as reflections of the emperor's desire, and when one failed to please. Punishment came not as a public spectacle, but as a private ceremony. It was whispered that within the palace walls existed a hidden chamber, a place not recorded on any map, guarded by eunuchs sworn to eternal silence. There, beneath red lanterns and carved dragons, silk was transformed from symbol of beauty into an instrument of pain. The process was conducted with ritualistic precision. The condemned woman would be dressed in her finest robe, silk of imperial white, her hair adorned as if for a festival. Music would play softly, the illusion of dignity preserved even as the cruelty began. The emperor never attended. He didn't need to. His silence was permission enough, and as the centuries turned, that ritual of elegance and agony was whispered of only in secret, passed down like a forbidden lullaby. They called it Ling Si, death by silk, but those who truly saw it gave it another name, the beautiful death. The chamber was not a dungeon, it was a masterpiece. Silken curtains shimmered in the flickering light of lanterns, their soft glow turning the air gold and crimson. Incense coiled in the silence like a living spirit. Every detail whispered refinement, as though the palace itself refused to admit that cruelty could exist within its walls. But it did. In the center of the room stood a low lacquered platform, carved with dragons chasing pearls. Upon it lay the woman chosen for the ritual. Her beauty had once been the envy of the court, her laughter, a melody that had charmed the emperor himself. Now that same beauty had become her curse. She was draped in white silk, the same silk that would soon become her undoing. Her wrists were tied with ribbons, her breath trembling as servants bowed before the executioners, men not in armor, but in robes of the same shimmering cloth. To the unknowing eye, it might have looked like a sacred ceremony, not an execution. The first touch was gentle, the silk gliding across her skin like a lover's caress. Then came the tightening, slowly, deliberately. The strands wound around her limbs, her waist, her neck. Silk, the pride of the empire, could slice through flesh when drawn with enough patience. It did not tear like rope. It whispered, it kissed. It punished with elegance. The executioners worked in silence, each movement precise, choreographed like a dance they had rehearsed 100 times. The sound of silk tightening was almost inaudible, but in the stillness it screamed. The woman's lips trembled, but she made no sound. Royal decorum forbade her from breaking the illusion. Even in death she had to be graceful. Hours passed. Sweat mingled with perfume. The white silk, once pure, turned crimson as the strands cut deeper, and yet the music played, slow, haunting, timeless. They said the purpose of Ling Si was not merely death but surrender, to strip away defiance thread by thread, until nothing remained but silence. By dawn, when the final note of music faded, the woman's body was motionless, her face still serene as though she had simply fallen asleep. Around her, the silk lay coiled like a serpent satisfied after its feast. The attendants would come, wash the chamber, and fold the blood-stained fabric with reverence. It would be buried, not burned, for silk, they believed, carried the essence of the soul. In the Forbidden City, life continued as if nothing had happened. The emperor dined. The courtiers gossiped. The concubines laughed once more, softer this time, careful not to shine too brightly. And in the hidden chamber, the silk awaited its next name, its next whisper, its next victim. For centuries, scholars would whisper of the Silken Death, calling it myth, a cruel invention of foreign travelers. But buried deep within the forbidden archives, sealed behind red wax and imperial decrees, lies evidence too precise, too deliberate, to be legend. The order for the silken punishment came not from lowly torturers, but from within the emperor's own household. It was designed for one purpose: control, royal concubines, noble daughters, even queens, women born into silk, adorned in luxury, were bound by the same thread that clothed them. To disobey, to betray, or to humiliate the throne meant death, but not an ordinary death. The empire demanded beauty, even in its executions. The ritual was born during the reign of Emperor Xuande, when an imperial mistress, Lady May, dared to defy him. She had been his favorite once, her poems recited across the court, her portrait painted on jade. But she grew ambitious. She sought influence, whispered advice into the ears of ministers, and slowly, her grace became her weapon. When her plans were uncovered, she was not dragged through the streets like a common traitor. Instead, she was dressed in white adorned with jewels and brought to a private chamber hung with silk curtains, her own silks. The emperor watched from behind a screen, unseen, as the execution began. Every motion was slow, measured, ceremonial. To him, this was justice wrapped in elegance and the perfection of punishment. But what he didn't foresee was that this ritual would become an obsession. After Lady May's death, her executioners refined the technique. They recorded temperatures, silk densities, not structures, turning cruelty into a science of aesthetics. It became known as the flower of pain, a secret art of execution used exclusively for women of noble blood. The irony was unbearable. The higher one's status, the more beautiful one's death was expected to be. Decades later, a scribe named Leon uncovered the emperor's personal order log, hidden behind a false wall. He found records of 27 such executions, all described not in words of death but of design. The subject wore white silk of 12 threads. The process lasted 5 hours and 40 minutes. The outcome, aesthetically satisfactory. The phrase aesthetically satisfactory appeared again and again. Leon, horrified, tried to expose what he found. Within days he vanished. His home was sealed, his name erased from court records, but his final note survived, smuggled out by a servant who fled across the northern borders. In those notes, Leon wrote, "The silk was not punishment. It was worship of beauty, of control, of perfection taken to madness. The revelation shattered the illusion of refinement." The empire that prided itself on art had turned execution into performance, and death into decoration. Even centuries later, whispers persist that some of those silks remain hidden beneath palace floors, folded neatly, still bearing traces of blood that time refuses to erase. And in the stillness of those halls, when the wind passes through torn curtains, some say the silk still moves. The Silken Death did not vanish with the dynasty that created it. Like a perfume that lingers long after the body has decayed, its essence haunted every empire that followed. Within the forbidden city, a quiet dread took root, one that no decree could erase. Noble women walked softly, spoke softly, lived as though their breath itself might offend the throne. The very silks they wore, gifts of prestige, became reminders of mortality. In paintings you can see the shift. Before Xuande's reign, royal portraits shimmered with color and confidence. After, and the women's eyes began to change. Their gazes turned distant, glassy, as if they were already aware of what awaited them should they fall from favor. The poets called it the blooming silence, the beauty of women too afraid to speak. Over centuries, the ritual was erased from official texts. Every mention was struck out, burned, or rewritten as fiction. The empire called it mercy. The scholars called it myth. But beneath that silence, the fear remained. Even foreign ambassadors wrote of a strange quiet among the emperor's wives, noting how no laughter echoed through the inner courts, only the rustle of silk in empty corridors. When Western explorers arrived in the 18th century, they spoke of China's elegance, its refinement, never realizing that the very refinement they admired was built atop centuries of ritualized fear. It wasn't just punishment anymore. It had evolved into culture, a philosophy of obedience draped in beauty. Mothers would whisper to their daughters, "Smile gracefully, even in pain." And that single line, born from the echoes of the silken chamber, became a generational curse. As time moved on, dynasties fell, palaces crumbled, and wars reshaped the land. But that thread and that belief that beauty must hide suffering never broke. It stretched across centuries, weaving itself into fashion, art, and even the quiet sorrow behind Chinese femininity itself. Today, when historians find fragments of silk embroidered with strange reddish stains, they often dismiss it as pigment or dye. But some know better, because history may forget names and empires, but silk remembers everything. Centuries later, when the forbidden city fell silent for the last time, the hall still shimmered faintly with something unseen, not ghosts, but memories, woven into every curtain, every robe, every fold of silk that had once brushed against trembling skin. They say the human soul leaves traces wherever it suffers. And if that's true, then those chambers are still breathing quietly, beneath layers of dust and history. Archaeologists who entered the ruins in the early 20th century reported strange sensations, an unexplained warmth in empty rooms, a faint fragrance of roses where no flowers grew, and the uncanny rustle of silk, even when no one moved. Perhaps it's just the wind, or perhaps it's the echo of every woman who ever smiled through the pain, her last breath caught between beauty and terror, because that was the genius and the curse of the Silken Death. It didn't just destroy the body, it turned suffering into art, and so the world forgot. The story faded, hidden beneath centuries of empire and progress. But beauty still demands obedience. Pain still hides beneath luxury, and every silken thread, no matter how soft, still carries the weight of those who bled for perfection. When you touch silk today, when it slides across your fingers like water, you are touching what was once a weapon. You are holding a secret the world promised never to remember. But the fabric remembers. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it whispering, softly, beautifully, terribly, like a scream wrapped in silk. So now you know the truth, how beauty became a blade and silk the instrument of silence. They said it was reserved for royalty, for women too precious to die like commoners. But tell me, was it mercy? Or was it a masterpiece of cruelty disguised as elegance? History buried the device. The records were burned. But some say one remains, locked in a private collection somewhere in Shanghai, its silk still unstained, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, some beauty should never be touched again. Because every time we glorify perfection, we walk the same path they did, a path paved with silk and soaked in quiet screams. What do you think? Was this torture truly erased from history, or simply reimagined for a modern world that still worships beauty over mercy?